Once there was a girl named Ella who lived at the edge of a kingdom where the trees had turned to glass. Nobody knew when it had happened. Some said it was 100 years ago. Some said 200. The oldest people in the kingdom could not remember a time when the glass forest had not been there. That wide, silent wood on the eastern border where every trunk, every branch, every leaf was made of clear crystal that caught the light and split it into color. At sunset, the whole forest burned pink and gold. At midnight, it went silver and still, and at dawn, in the moment before the sun fully rose, the trees showed something stranger than color. They showed reflections, not of the sky or the land around them, but of whatever stood before them, and not the outside of a thing. The inside. This was why no one went into the glass forest. A few had tried over the years. They came back changed. Some quiet, some weeping, some refusing to speak about what they had seen. The forest showed you what you truly were, and that was not always a comfortable thing to look at. Ella had lived next to the glass forest her whole life. Her house, which had once belonged to her father before he died, sat at the very edge of the wood, close enough that on clear mornings she could see her own reflection in the nearest glass trees from the kitchen window while she worked. She did not mind what she saw. She was a slight girl with dark hair and gray eyes, and she lived with her stepmother Marta and her two stepsisters Osla and Venna. You may already know something about this kind of arrangement. Marta was cold and exacting. Osla was loud and unkind. Venna was quieter but watched everything with sharp calculating eyes that missed nothing and softened toward no one. Ella cooked and cleaned and mended and carried and was thanked for none of it, and the glass forest outside the window was the only thing she could look at that felt entirely honest. Now, do you know what a reflection is? A reflection is an image of something that you see in a mirror, or in still water, or in glass. When you look in a mirror, you see your reflection, an image of your own face looking back at you. But the glass forest showed a deeper reflection than any mirror. It showed not your face, but your heart. The prince's name was Cael, and he had sent a proclamation throughout the kingdom, not a ball. There would be no ball, no dancing, no glass slipper. He had chosen a different test, one his mother the queen had designed before she died. Any person who wished to be considered for the prince's hand would have to journey through the glass forest and reach the pavilion on the other side. The forest would decide who could pass. The forest had always decided everything honestly, and the queen had trusted it. The proclamation said that the journey would begin at dawn on the first day of the new moon. Anyone who wished to attempt the forest could come to the eastern road and enter at sunrise. Osla heard this and immediately began planning her outfit. It would be gold, she decided, because gold was the color of importance, and she was very important. She spent 3 days choosing fabric. Venna heard it and began calculating. She asked several pointed questions about how the forest worked, whether there were ways around it, and whether the prince would simply have to accept whoever arrived at the pavilion, regardless of what the forest had shown. When she received unsatisfactory answers to all 3 questions, she settled into a long, thoughtful silence that Ella found considerably more alarming than Osla's noise. Ella heard it and stood still for a moment at the kitchen window, looking at the glass trees, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. A sense that perhaps the honest thing and the right thing were about to arrive at the same moment, which did not happen as often as it should. She said nothing about wanting to go. She knew better. The night before the journey, Ella sat by the kitchen fire after everyone had gone to bed. She was mending a torn hem, one of Osla's dresses naturally, gold fabric heavy in her lap, when the fire did something unusual. It burned green for a moment, just a moment. Then a woman was sitting across from her in the chair that was always empty. She was not young, and she was not old. She had silver hair and green eyes and an expression of someone who had been watching things for a very long time and found most of them predictable and occasionally one of them genuinely surprising. She told Ella she was her godmother, which Ella accepted with less surprise than might be expected, because Ella had always suspected there was something in the fire. The godmother said she could not give Ella a gown or a carriage or glass slippers. She said that was not what this test required, and it would not have helped anyway. What she could give her was this: a single truth and a choice. The truth was that the glass forest would not hurt her. Whatever Ella saw in the glass trees, whatever the forest showed her of herself, it would not be cruel, because the forest was honest, and Ella had nothing to hide from an honest mirror. The forest frightened people who were afraid of what they were. Ella was not that kind of person. The choice was whether to go. Ella set down Osla's gold hem. She said she would go. The godmother smiled, not warmly exactly, but approvingly, the way someone smiles when a thing they expected to happen does happen. Then the fire went back to its ordinary orange, and the chair was empty, and Ella finished the hem and went to bed. At dawn, Osla swept down the eastern road in her gold dress, which was magnificent and which she was fully aware of. She reached the edge of the glass forest and stepped forward and looked into the first trees. What the forest showed Osla, every unkind thing she had ever said, reflected back in the glass. Every cruelty, every dismissal, every moment she had taken something from someone smaller because she could. The reflections did not judge. They simply showed. They were perfectly accurate. Osla looked at her reflection for 30 seconds. Then she made a sound that was not quite a word and turned and walked back down the road very quickly. She told everyone the forest was broken and the whole test was stupid, and she did not want to marry a prince anyway. Venna approached the forest more carefully. She stood at the edge for a long time, studying the glass trees with her calculating eyes, looking for gaps, looking for angles, looking for any path that went around rather than through. The forest, which had been reflecting honest things for 200 years and had seen this approach before, simply waited. When Venna finally looked directly at the nearest tree, she saw herself as she actually was. Not the polished, careful surface she presented to the world, but the coldness underneath it. The way she moved through every room, measuring what could be taken and what could be used. It was not a violent reflection. It was simply accurate. Venna stood with this for longer than Osla had. She was a more honest person about herself in private, which is its own strange kind of courage, and she looked at what the forest showed her without flinching. But she did not go forward, because the forest was not just showing her what she was. It was asking whether she was willing to change. And Venna, looking at the clear glass trees in the cold dawn light, decided she was not ready for that. Not today. She turned and walked away quietly, which was more dignity than most people managed. Ella arrived at the forest edge as the sun was fully up, which made her later than she had planned because someone had needed the kitchen fire lit and the water carried, and there was always something. She was wearing her plain gray dress, the one she wore every day, and her dark hair was in its usual braid, and she had no gold and no preparation and no plan except to walk forward and see what the glass showed her. She stepped into the glass forest. The first tree reflected her face as she actually was. Tired, yes, a little thin, her gray eyes large in the morning light, but the reflection was not unkind. It showed something underneath the tiredness that Ella had not quite seen from the outside. A steadiness, a rootedness, the look of someone who had been through a great deal and had not become hard from it, which is not a small thing. Ella looked at this for a moment and then walked forward. The second tree showed her kindness, not as a vague, warm feeling, but as specific acts. The small fire lit before anyone asked. The mended things. The food prepared carefully even for people who did not thank her for it. The time she had found a small bird with a broken wing outside the kitchen door and spent a week tending it until it flew. The forest showed all of this clearly and without sentiment. Simply, here is what you have done. Here is what you are made of. Ella walked forward. The trees multiplied. The forest was deep, deeper than it looked from the road, and the glass trunks rose on all sides, each one reflecting something. Some of the reflections were not easy. One tree showed her grief, her father's face, which she did not let herself think about during the day because there was always too much to do. She stopped at that tree for a while. She put her hand on its glass trunk and felt the cold of it and let herself look. The forest held the reflection steady and did not rush her. She walked forward. Here is what the glass forest did not do. It did not tell Ella she was perfect. It did not show her only the good parts and conceal the rest. There was a tree that showed her the times she had stayed silent when she should have spoken. A tree that showed her the small, quiet resentments she carried, the ones she was too tired to act on, but that were there nonetheless. A tree that showed her fear, a deep one, the fear that this was simply what her life was and would stay. Ella looked at all of these. She did not look away, and she walked forward. This was the thing the forest was testing, not whether you were good, not whether you were perfect, whether you could see yourself completely and keep walking. The trees began to thin. Light came through them differently, warmer, fuller, the glass catching the morning sun and breaking it into color that fell across the path like scattered jewels, blue and rose and gold, moving slowly as the branches shifted. Ella walked out of the glass forest into a wide meadow on the other side, and the sunlight was warm on her face, and the pavilion was ahead of her, an open stone structure with white columns and a flowering vine covering the roof. And standing at its entrance was a young man with dark hair and a serious face that was currently looking at her with an expression she could not immediately identify. She later decided it was recognition, the expression of someone seeing a thing they had been waiting to see without knowing exactly what it would look like. Prince Cael had been standing at the pavilion since dawn, watching the forest edge. He had watched Osla arrive and turn back in less than a minute. He had watched Venna stand at the edge for a long time, which impressed him more than he showed, though she also turned back. He had begun to wonder whether the forest was simply too honest for anyone to pass, which was a problem his mother had perhaps not fully considered. Then he had watched Ella walk in, and he had watched her not come out for a long time, longer than anyone who had ever tried. Long enough that he had begun to walk toward the forest himself, which he was not supposed to do. When she came out of the trees, unhurried, in a plain gray dress with leaves in her braid from the low branches, he was 20 paces from the forest edge. He asked how it was in there. Ella looked back at the glass trees, which were catching the morning light and turning it into color. She thought about the question seriously, the way she thought about most things. She said it was very honest. She said that was not as frightening as she had expected. Cael said that most people found it too frightening to finish. Ella said she supposed that depended on what you were afraid of. She said she had been looking at herself in those trees from the kitchen window her whole life. She was used to what she saw. Cael was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if she would like to sit down, because she had been walking through an enchanted forest since sunrise, and he realized, not offered her anything to eat or drink, which was a significant failure of hospitality. Ella said she would like that very much, thank you. They sat in the pavilion and talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with kingdoms or tests or proclamations, about the forest and what it showed, and what it meant to see yourself honestly and keep going. Cael found that she listened the way very few people listened, with her whole attention and without preparing her next sentence while he spoke. Ella found that he asked questions that actually wanted answers, which was rarer than it should be. It was a beginning, not a perfect one. There was a stepmother and 2 stepsisters and a household to deal with, and none of that untangles easily or quickly. But it was an honest one, which is the only kind worth having. And the glass forest stood at the eastern border of the kingdom, as it always had, catching the light and showing the truth. And on clear mornings when the sun came in at the right angle, the whole forest burned pink and gold and beautiful, and anyone who looked into it saw exactly what they were, which was more than most mirrors ever showed.